The restaurant glowed with soft golden lights, glasses clinking as friends gathered around a long table. Emma had spent weeks arranging the surprise, Daniel's favorite dishes, his closest friends. A cake with 40 candles ready to be lit. Laughter bubbled across the room, but when Daniel arrived, something was off. He smiled, kissed her cheek, but his eyes flicked nervously toward the door, as if expecting someone, or dreading them. Emma brushed it aside, telling herself he was overwhelmed by the attention. As dinner stretched on, Daniel barely touched his food. He kept checking his watch, shifting in his chair. Emma leaned in. "Are you all right?" she whispered. He forced a grin. "Just tired. Long week." Her friends noticed nothing. Toasts were raised, jokes exchanged, and Emma tried to lose herself in the warmth of the evening. Yet the unease clung to her like a shadow. Then the door opened. A woman stepped inside, her posture sharp, her eyes locked on Daniel. She wasn't dressed for celebration. She was dressed for confrontation. Emma followed Daniel's gaze and saw the color drain from his face. The woman moved closer, weaving through the tables. When she reached him, she leaned down, whispered something no one else could hear. Emma saw his jaw tighten, his knuckles whiten on the tablecloth. "Who is she?" Emma asked, voice low, urgent. Daniel didn't answer. He pushed back his chair, muttered something about needing air. The laughter died around them, friends watching with puzzled glances. Emma's heart thudded, a sick weight settling in her stomach. The cake arrived then, 40 candles burning brightly, but the seat of honor stood empty. The candles flickered against Emma's frozen face as she realized the night she thought would celebrate their life together had cracked open something she couldn't name. Outside, through the restaurant's glass window, she caught sight of Daniel with the woman, his head bowed, her hand gripping his arm. Whatever she said had already shattered the night. Emma felt it in her bones. The celebration was over before it had even begun. The drive home after the ruined dinner was wrapped in silence. Daniel stared out the window, his face washed pale by passing streetlights. Emma gripped the steering wheel, her thoughts whirling. She didn't ask who the woman was, not yet. The words sat heavy on her tongue, but she swallowed them down, afraid of the answer. That night she lay awake, listening to the rhythm of his breathing beside her. 40 years of his life, 15 of them with her. Yet for the first time she felt like she was lying next to a stranger. Her mind drifted backward, clawing for certainty. She remembered their first date, the awkward way he spilled coffee across the table, then laughed until she joined in. She remembered late-night walks when he held her hand as though it were the only tether keeping him steady. She remembered Sunday mornings, newspapers spread across the kitchen table, his smile hidden behind the rustle of folded pages. Daniel had always been steady, the calm to her storm. He fixed leaky faucets, paid bills on time, remembered to bring her tulips every spring. Their life together had been quiet, ordinary, and Emma had believed that was the truest kind of happiness. But now, ordinary details took on new shapes. The work trips that seemed longer than necessary. The phone calls he'd take in the garage, his voice low, unreadable. The moments when he would grow distant, distracted, only to return with a tender kiss that smoothed over her doubts. "Do we ever really know the person sleeping beside us?" Emma whispered into the dark. Her own voice startled her. Daniel stirred slightly, murmuring something incoherent, and rolled onto his side. She stared at his back, searching for answers in the rise and fall of his breath. The man she thought she knew, the man who built a life with her, was slipping through her fingers, replaced by someone else. The memory of his pale face when the woman appeared replayed again and again, an image she could not silence. Emma turned toward the ceiling, eyes burning. The cracks had begun to show, and she could no longer pretend she didn't see them. Tomorrow, she promised herself, she would demand the truth. Morning light bled through the curtains, exposing the unease Emma had carried through the night. She sat across from Daniel at the kitchen table, coffee cooling in her hands. His expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes darted away when she finally asked, "Who was she?" He didn't hesitate. "A colleague." Nothing more. "She shouldn't have shown up last night. It was inappropriate." The words were steady, almost rehearsed, but Emma's stomach twisted. Something in his tone carried the polished ease of a man who'd lied before. A colleague who knows how to make you turn white in a room full of friends? She pressed. Daniel's jaw tightened. Emma, please. Don't make this bigger than it is. You're overthinking. It was the same phrase he'd used countless times over the years. She remembered the late-night calls, the vague explanations about deadlines, the unexplained absences during family events. How many times had she let those moments slide? She wanted to believe him, so she had. She had told herself trust was the foundation of their marriage. Now she wondered if it had been blindness. Her mind replayed details she once dismissed. The way he silenced his phone at dinner, claiming work emergencies. The way his shirt sometimes smelled faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. The way his eyes carried shadows, as if haunted by a world she had never been allowed to enter. Emma, Daniel said, softer now, reaching across the table. I love you. I always have. Please don't let someone from work come between us. She pulled her hand away before his could reach it. If that's all she is, then why do I feel like I don't know you anymore? He exhaled slowly, lips parting as though to confess something, but instead he stood, pressing a kiss to her forehead. You'll see. Everything's fine. Emma watched him leave for work, the front door closing with an almost final thud. Her chest tightened. The fractures weren't only in his story. They were in the foundation of their marriage, and she could no longer pretend not to see them. Tomorrow, she decided she would dig deeper. Emma could not shake the image of the woman at the restaurant. Her sharp eyes, the quiet urgency in her whisper. By morning, doubt had hardened into determination. Daniel's excuses no longer sufficed. If she wanted the truth, she would have to find it herself. Through a cautious exchange of messages, sent on a phone Daniel rarely touched, Emma arranged to meet the woman. Her name was Lydia. They chose a small cafe on the edge of town, away from familiar eyes. Emma arrived first, hands trembling as she wrapped them around a steaming cup, heart pounding with the sense that she was crossing an invisible line. Lydia entered minutes later, looking younger than Emma expected, yet carrying herself with a weary edge that spoke of secrets long kept. She slid into the booth opposite Emma and, without preamble, said, I didn't know he was married. Emma's breath caught. She had prepared herself for betrayal, but hearing it aloud sliced deeper than imagined. I thought maybe a colleague, maybe a misunderstanding, Emma murmured. Lydia shook her head. No, Daniel and I have been together for almost 5 years. He told me he was single, that he was too busy building his career for a real relationship. I believed him. The words struck like blows. 5 years. Years when Emma had been folding laundry, cooking dinners, waiting for him to come home late. Emma's voice cracked. Why are you telling me this now? Lydia hesitated, her expression tightening. Because I'm not the only one he's lied to. There are things you don't know, things worse than infidelity. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. He's been using people. Money that doesn't add up, accounts in names that aren't his. I tried to pull away, but when I asked too many questions, he threatened me. Said he could ruin my life with one phone call. Emma's blood ran cold. Daniel, her steady husband, the man who brought her tea when she was sick, who knew the exact way she liked her toast, threatening women, hiding money, leading double lives. Lydia's eyes softened. I'm telling you because you deserve to know. I think you're in danger too. He's not who you think he is. Emma could barely breathe. She wanted to scream, to deny, to run. Instead, she whispered, What do I do? Lydia's answer was quiet but firm. You need to decide whether you're going to keep protecting him or protect yourself. Emma left the cafe numb, Lydia's words echoing with every step. That night, when Daniel walked through the door, smiling as though nothing had changed, Emma knew nothing in her marriage would ever be the same. Emma waited until Daniel was asleep before slipping into his office. Her chest was tight, her ears straining for the smallest sound, but she forced herself forward. Lydia's warning echoed in her head. He's not who you think he is. The office had always been his space. Daniel insisted it was where he focused, shutting the door for hours at a time. She had respected that boundary until now. Tonight, respect had no place, only survival. She pulled open drawers, rifled through folders, her fingers brushing against documents thick with dust. Bills neatly stacked. Work reports, nothing suspicious. But then, Behind a row of old tax files, she found a slim black binder secured with a rubber band. Her pulse spiked. Inside were bank statements, accounts Emma had never seen before. Transfers in and out, large sums moving across names she didn't recognize. Her hands trembled as she traced the numbers, realizing entire paychecks had disappeared into shadows. A folder hidden beneath the binder made her blood run colder. Airline receipts, Paris, Buenos Aires, Toronto, places Daniel had never mentioned visiting. Trips that lined up suspiciously with weekends he'd claimed to be on conferences. Emma's memory replayed those days, her waiting alone. The vague excuses, the unanswered calls. She leaned back, her breath shallow, staring at the ledger of a life she was never meant to see. Each page revealed a version of Daniel meticulously concealed, one built on lies and deception. Her phone buzzed suddenly, startling her. A message from Daniel sent from the bedroom upstairs. "Where are you?" Her heart lurched. Did he know? Was he testing her? Emma shoved the files back as best she could, her movements frantic but clumsy. She slipped out of the office, forcing her face into calm before stepping into the bedroom. Daniel lay under the covers, phone in hand, his eyes on her as if measuring the weight of her secrets. "Couldn't sleep," she murmured. He smiled faintly, too faintly, before setting his phone aside. "Neither could I." Emma slid into bed, her body stiff beside his warmth. Beneath the silence, a storm brewed, each hidden receipt and account screaming louder than words. She realized then that Lydia had been right. Daniel's double life wasn't just about another woman. It was bigger, darker, and it was closing in. Emma couldn't keep the discoveries buried. The ledger, the receipts, the lies, they pressed against her chest like stones. That evening, as Daniel sipped his whiskey in the living room, she forced the words out. "I found the accounts," she said quietly. "The trips. The money." His glass froze midair, then lowered slowly. A practiced calm spread across his face. "Emma," he murmured, voice smooth as silk. "You've misunderstood." Her heart hammered. Don't tell me I'm imagining papers that I held in my hands." Daniel chuckled softly like she'd spoken a childish fear. "You've always had that tendency, remember? Seeing connections where there aren't any. Last year, you swore I missed your birthday dinner, but I reminded you. I was there. You just forgot." Emma blinked, the memory colliding with his words. He had brought flowers that night, hadn't he? Or did she only remember because he told her so later? Doubt slithered through her. "You've been under so much stress," Daniel continued, his tone warm, persuasive. "Grieving your father, worrying about the mortgage. Stress makes the mind unreliable." Emma's breath hitched. He was weaving her own pain against her, binding her confusion tighter. She remembered nights he'd dismissed her concerns, called her too sensitive, convinced her that her suspicions were paranoia. How long had this been happening? Her fury surged. "Stop it. Stop twisting things. I know what I saw." Daniel leaned forward, his eyes steady, almost tender. "What you saw were documents taken out of context. Investments, work expenses. You didn't ask me first, you assumed the worst. That hurts, Emma. After everything we've built." The words struck at her loyalty, pulling guilt into the cracks of her certainty. She wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but his voice smothered her with a softness that felt like chains. Silence filled the room. Emma stood trembling, her knuckles white against the edge of the table. "Please," she whispered, more to herself than him. "Please let me not be crazy." Daniel reached for her hand, his grip firm, reassuring. "You're not crazy. You're just tired. Trust me." And with those words, Emma felt her grip on reality loosen. Aware, yet trapped, inside a story he was still writing for her. The words "trust me" still clung to Emma's skin like oil. She could hear Daniel's calm voice replaying in her head, steady, convincing, suffocating. Yet the ledger, the receipts, Lydia's warning, they refused to disappear. 2 days later, Lydia called. Her voice shook with something heavier than regret. "I need to see you again. There are things you don't know, things I should have told you before." Emma hesitated. Meeting again meant betraying the fragile truce she and Daniel had settled into since their last confrontation. But deep inside, she knew silence was more dangerous than truth. They met at a park where autumn leaves fell around them in brittle whispers. Lydia wore sunglasses despite the cloudy sky, her face pale, tired. She sat beside Emma on a bench, clutching her purse like armor. "I thought I loved him," Lydia began. "That's how he made me feel at first. Special, chosen. He showered me with gifts, jewelry, trips, dinners in cities I'd only dreamed of. But every gift had strings. Every kindness came with a price." Emma's throat tightened. The echoes of her own marriage ran through Lydia's words. How Daniel's gentle gestures had often followed arguments. How apologies were wrapped in roses. "He promised me he'd leave you," Lydia continued bitterly. "Said your marriage was dead, that he stayed only for appearances. But every time I asked when, he had a new excuse. A sick relative. Work pressure. You weren't ready. Always lies." Emma's chest ached, torn between rage and humiliation. "And when I pushed harder," Lydia's voice dropped. "He threatened me. Said he could ruin me, financially, socially. He has information on people, connections I don't understand. Once he showed me a folder with my name on it. Bank details. Old photos. Things he should never have had. That's when I knew it wasn't just about love. It was control." Emma shivered. She remembered moments when Daniel's charm felt less like devotion and more like possession. How many times had she mistaken fear for loyalty? Lydia reached out, her hand trembling. "You're not crazy, Emma. You're not weak. You're trapped like me. He makes us doubt ourselves so we can't see the bars closing in." Tears blurred Emma's vision. For the first time, she didn't see Lydia as an enemy, but as a mirror. A woman caught in the same web. Emma whispered, "Then maybe the only way out is to stop him." Lydia's silence was heavy, but her eyes flickered with something that looked like agreement. The night of his birthday replayed in Emma's mind like a cruel riddle. Candles, laughter, the clinking of glasses, all of it blurred against the single image of Daniel paling when Lydia appeared. At first, Emma had thought the shock was emotional, the slip of a guilty man caught. But the more she pieced together, the more she realized it was something darker. The ledger showed transfers dated that very week, sums large enough to drain the accounts they had built together. Airline tickets Lydia had uncovered bore the same day, the morning after his birthday dinner. His smile that night had not been for her or their friends. It had been a mask, concealing the countdown to his escape. Emma remembered how carefully she had prepared the evening. She had ordered his favorite cake, chosen the restaurant he loved, invited the people who mattered most. She wanted to honor him, to remind him of the life they had built side by side. All the while, he had been rehearsing an exit, planning her abandonment in secret. The thought hollowed her. Their marriage hadn't unraveled in a single night. It had been dismantled brick by brick, while she distracted herself with loyalty. His 40th birthday wasn't just a milestone. It was his line in the sand, the moment he intended to end the double life by cutting her out of it entirely. She could almost hear Lydia's warning again. "You're not crazy. You're trapped." And now Emma saw the full scope of the trap. The dinner, the candles, the gifts. It had been staged as her farewell without her knowledge. Fury surged in her veins, stronger than despair. How dare he script her into the role of abandoned wife, all while pretending to celebrate love. That night, sitting in the silence of their bedroom, Emma whispered to herself, it was never a birthday. It was a goodbye. Her reflection in the mirror looked back at her with something unrecognizable. No longer just a wife, no longer just a victim. She knew then that she could not wait for Daniel to decide the ending of their story. The man she loved had been ready to vanish. The only question now was whether she would let him. The courtroom was colder than Emma expected, its walls pale and merciless, its air heavy with the weight of judgment. She sat in the gallery, hands clenched in her lap, the faint echo of the judge's gavel ringing through her bones. It was here, not at their dinner table or in their bedroom, that the truth of her marriage would finally be spoken aloud. The prosecutor's voice cut through the silence with surgical precision. One by one, files and exhibits were presented. Forged contracts, falsified invoices, trails of money siphoned through accounts in names Emma had never heard before. Names that were real enough to house stolen funds, fake enough to shield Daniel from discovery. Emma's stomach twisted as charts appeared on the projector, highlighting transfers that stretched back years. Vacations she thought he had earned were paid for with money that wasn't his. The jewelry he'd gifted her on anniversaries, tokens she once held as symbols of devotion, were bought with fraudulent accounts. Then came the testimonies. Former clients spoke of trust betrayed, savings stolen, futures dismantled. Lydia's name surfaced too, woven into the narrative as a pawn Daniel had used to perpetuate his facade, a mistress he paraded in another city while maintaining his suburban shell. Every voice in that courtroom hammered the same truth. Daniel wasn't the man Emma had married. He wasn't even the man she had doubted, confronted, or mourned. He was someone else entirely, an architect of lies building a life out of stolen foundations. Emma's eyes drifted to Daniel at the defense table. His posture was impeccable, his expression calm, but she saw the cracks. His jaw clenched at every damning word. His fingers twitched when the ledgers were displayed. Yet he never looked at her, never once turned to meet her eyes in the gallery. She thought of the birthday cake, of his whispered reassurances, of the way he once promised, "It's you and me against the world." Now it was clear she had never been his partner. She had been his alibi. The judge called for recess. Chairs scraped, murmurs rose, but Emma remained seated, rooted to the spot. The man she had devoted her life to was collapsing before her eyes, each layer stripped, until only the criminal remained. For the first time since the knock at midnight, Emma felt something close to finality. Not closure, never closure, but the slow burial of a love that had already died. And as the courtroom emptied, she wondered, when the mask was gone, what would be left of him and of her? The prison smelled of metal and disinfectant, a sterile place that stripped away any illusion of comfort. Emma's footsteps echoed down the corridor, her pulse quickening with each step that brought her closer to him. For days she debated whether to come at all, but the need for answers outweighed the fear of hearing his voice again. When Daniel appeared, escorted by guards, the sight nearly stole her breath. His hair was unkempt, his face hollowed, but his posture remained defiant even in chains. He sat across from her, wrists cuffed to the table, eyes glinting with the same intensity she once mistook for love. "Emma," he said softly, almost tenderly. "You came." She didn't answer at first. The silence stretched, the clinking of his shackles filling the void. Finally she whispered, "Why?" Daniel leaned forward, his voice low, weaving words like a net. "I lived two lives because I had to. The man you knew, the husband, the provider, was the best of me. The other life, the lies, the money that was survival, I kept it from you because I couldn't bear for you to see the monster I really was. I lied to protect you, to give you the life you deserved." Emma's chest tightened. For years she would have believed him. She would have clung to the idea that every deception was an act of twisted devotion. But now the veil was gone. She saw the manipulation for what it was, chains invisible as the ones binding his wrists. "You didn't protect me," she said firmly, though her voice trembled. "You used me. You made me complicit in a life I never agreed to." For the first time, a flicker of something, pain, maybe even shame, crossed his features. He reached out as far as the chains allowed. "I loved you, Emma, more than anyone. Everything I did was to keep us together." Her eyes burned, torn between grief and fury. Part of her ached for the man she once believed in, but another part, stronger now, saw only the predator beneath the mask. Emma stood, her chair scraping against the floor. Love isn't supposed to feel like a cage. As the guards moved to escort him away, Daniel's gaze followed her, desperate, unyielding. "You'll always be mine," he said. Emma walked out without looking back, but his words clung to her, heavier than the chains he wore. The house felt cavernous without his presence, though Daniel's absence should have been a relief. Emma wandered its rooms like a ghost, tracing her fingers along the familiar walls, each corner echoing memories she could no longer trust. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by the faint ticking of the kitchen clock, a reminder of time wasted in the service of illusions. In the solitude, she began to confront the truth she had long buried. It wasn't just Daniel who had lied. She too had been a participant in the performance. There had been late-night phone calls that ended the moment she entered the room. Strange receipts she brushed aside. Stories that shifted slightly each time he retold them. She had noticed the cracks, but she smoothed them over with excuses, bandaging doubt with love. Emma sat at the dining table, the same one where birthdays and anniversaries once sparkled with laughter. Now it was littered with old photographs, bank statements, and fragments of a life that no longer made sense. Her eyes lingered on one picture. Daniel smiling, his arm draped over her shoulders, both of them radiant with joy. But behind that smile lay secrets, and behind hers a willingness not to ask questions. "I let it happen," she whispered to the empty room. The words stung, but they were true. By choosing silence, by accepting half-truths, she had allowed his deceit to grow unchecked. Love had not been blindness forced upon her. It had been blindness she willingly wore. The weight of guilt pressed harder than grief. Was she a victim, or had she been his silent accomplice? The question gnawed at her, making sleep elusive and daylight cruel. She recalled Lydia's haunted eyes, the stories of threats and false promises. If she had spoken up sooner, would it have spared them both? Or was she only ever another pawn in Daniel's game? Night fell, and shadows stretched long across the walls, wrapping around her like chains. Yet in the midst of despair, a seed of resolve began to form. She could not rewrite the past, but she could choose what came next. Emma rose from the table, gathering the papers into a single pile. The truth was hers to carry now, and she would not let it be buried in silence again. Morning sunlight spilled through the curtains, softer than it had ever felt in this house. Emma stood in the living room, a box of letters balanced in her hands. Letters Daniel had written from prison, desperate words filled with excuses, declarations of love and half-confessions. For weeks she had read them, searching for something real, some scrap of the man she once thought she loved. But now she saw them for what they were, chains dressed as sentiment. One by one, she fed the letters into the fireplace. The flames curled greedily around the paper, blackening his words until nothing remained but ash. The act was not bitter, but cleansing. For the first time in years, Emma felt the weight in her chest loosen. She whispered to the crackle of the fire, "No more shadows." The house that once echoed with laughter, secrets, and lies had grown unbearable. Emma walked through it slowly, touching walls that had heard every argument she swallowed, every silence she chose. Each room carried ghosts of a life she could no longer claim. When she placed the "For Sale" sign in the front yard, the decision did not sting. It steadied her. The house had been a monument to Daniel's double life, and she would not be its caretaker any longer. Weeks later, Emma found herself in a smaller home on the edge of town. The space was quiet, unburdened by memory. No reminders lingered, no shadows reached across the walls. She planted a single rose bush in the yard, her hands digging into the soil with determination. As it took root, so did she. At night, she sat by her new window, the silence no longer oppressive but restorative. She thought of Lydia, of all the others harmed by Daniel's deceit. They too were survivors, though each would carry scars in their own way. Emma had carried hers long enough. She poured herself a glass of wine, the first she had allowed in months, and lifted it to the darkened sky. "I was married to a stranger," she murmured, steady now. "But I won't die as one." The words lingered, neither bitter nor broken, but resolute. Emma was no longer defined by the man she lost. She was defined by the woman who remained.